The push for parity of treatment between mental and physical health problems is gathering pace, even though treatment of mental health is often harder to quantify than hospital operations, GP visits and ambulance waiting times, for example. One sad statistic that speaks clearly of those who reach the end of their tether is for suicides. 376 people took their lives across the south of England in 2015. As our Berkshire political reporter Patrick O'Hagan reports, in the Royal County they're trying a new way to reduce their share of that number.
In 2001, suicide rates in Detroit were rising steeply, with demise in the Motor City, steel and car industry destroying the local economy and with it, people's lives. Rather than accept the inevitable, doctors set themselves an ambitious target. From now on, they'd aim to lose nobody to suicide. The numbers are now just a fifth of what they were, and for one 2.5-year period, Detroit actually hit the target. Lessons learned there are now being picked up here at Berkshire's Prospect Park Hospital.
For us in Berkshire Healthcare, our board signed up to the project mid-2016. So for us, it's about relentlessly pursuing the goal of reducing suicides.
For this to work, everyone needs to be involved. A patient's GP and family and friends now work much more closely with specialists to ensure everyone knows what to do when somebody is thinking of killing themselves.
It's about involving families and loved ones, making sure the GP's fully aware of the plan, making sure people know where they can go for help if they do feel desperate again.
Berkshire's towns are some of the wealthiest in the UK. Everybody here in Reading seems to be either heading out for a coffee or a spot of retail therapy. But 1 in 4 of the people walking past me here today will suffer from a mental illness at one point in their life. And last year, 68 people in Berkshire decided they could take it no more.
BBC Radio Berkshire Monday morning. We're talking about the stigma of mental health issues today.
BBC Radio Berkshire is running a year-long campaign to see what it can do to bring the subject out into the open. Angela Ryan's one of 3 women involved in the radio station's Brighter Berkshire programme. She runs her own mental health charity after suffering a breakdown 4 years ago.
In 2013, I went down very quickly with psychotic depression, where I had hallucinations. I heard a man's voice. I could feel something touching my shoulder a lot of the time. If I was in the car, I would experience road signs jumping out at me, and I thought I got messages and things like that from the radio and the TV.
It got to the point where she thought about ending it all.
I had a psychotic voice for 10 to 12 hours a day some days. I would, at lunchtime, know that there was a bus coming at 12:30, and I'd negotiate with this voice, and I'd, if possible, would go out and stand in front of the bus.
While Angela does still hear voices, she's learned how to keep herself safe from the darkness they bring with them. She credits Berkshire's mental health teams with getting her through the worst moments, but says that without help from family and friends, her life would have turned out very differently. Mental health is often labelled a Cinderella service, but it is now moving up the political agenda. Just this week, the Newbury MP Richard Benyon did his bit during Prime Minister's Question Time.
Will my right honourable friend show her support for Brighter Berkshire?
I think it is important that we continue to raise the awareness of the issues around mental health, and the fact that the government has committed to this parity of esteem between mental health and physical health is important.
Talking about mental health in the corridors of power can only be good, but out in the real world, the stigma attached to it runs deep.
If we're looking at a construction worker, they're going to be very happy talking about their back problems or their gammy leg or whatever it might be, but they're going to be considerably less likely to talk about how perhaps they're feeling anxious or low and struggling to get to work because of those difficulties.
Keeping yourself healthy in both body and mind is something we should all aspire to. Most of us take too long to open up about what's bothering us, sometimes until it's too late. Polly Falconer's a rarity, talking openly about how she felt when a long relationship ended abruptly. She also now appears on BBC Radio Berkshire.
There were lots of times in the first year when I really just didn't want to be here. That's how low it got. You know, later on, I remember my daughter saying I felt like I'd lost my mum and my dad. And that was really hard to hear.
Polly Faulconer there, part of the Brighter Berkshire initiative. Duncan Enright, lots of talk. Is there enough money behind it as far as you're concerned from the government?
Well, there is this crisis in funding for the whole of the National Health Service, and that includes mental health care.
And money seems to have been borrowed from the mental health pot in some places.
I'm not sure about that,
but
I've heard that that's the case. Yes, yeah. Well, when money's short across the piece, then you have knock-on effects from all sorts of things, don't you? So the social care crisis is feeding the NHS's crisis, and so it's a big problem. It's a big problem. Now, the Labour Party in Parliament has a real focus on mental health issues, and we have a Shadow Minister for Mental Health, and we're really trying to push this as a key issue, because as a country, this is one of the biggest challenges we face now. And we must find solutions and be able to resource those solutions so that we have
it was the Prime Minister's
resilience and
big launch at the beginning of the year, wasn't it? Let's have parity.
Well, yes. And it hasn't happened.
It hasn't. And, well, she's only just starting on this, I suppose. Her aim is 10% reduction by 2021. That's not quite the same as a zero tolerance, as we saw from Detroit there. And the doctor who started that said, if we can aim to eradicate cancer, why aren't we saying we can eradicate suicide? Why not aim higher?
No, I think we need to be ambitious, and I think mental health is at last coming out of the shadows. Now, partly it's because people like Polly and Angela you've had on that clip, and MPs actually giving their own personal experiences of they've had an illness. It just happened to be a mental illness rather than a physical illness, which we talk about readily. I think things have changed a lot over the last 10, 20 years, but certainly mental health remains a Cinderella service in terms of funding within the NHS. And you're right, I'm afraid, that extra funding that's gone into mental health, 1.25 million into CAMS was announced a couple of years ago. It's not getting through to the sharp end. It is being used to fix the root. The services aren't joined up either. And they're not joined up. I mean, I chair the all-party group for 1001 Critical Days, which is all about perinatal mental health. 1 in 6 women will suffer from some form of perinatal mental illness. And if you have depression and other mental illnesses, your liability to form an attachment with your child in those crucial early years is much diminished. And there's one really alarming statistic. A 15 or 16-year-old teenager suffering from depression, there's a 95% chance that his or her mum was suffering from depression or mental illness during pregnancy or soon after. So we've got to attack it much earlier.
And it takes money to break that chain. And when there's not enough money for the NHS generally...
But it's a false economy not to do it. Perinatal mental illness costs this country over £8 billion per year by getting it wrong.
Right.
If we had more attention and more resource right at the beginning to make sure mums are happy during pregnancy, we're properly looking after them, supporting them, explaining what childhood is like.
You do press in this in lots of ways within the Conservative Party, but most of your party is not pressing for that. They're saying the NHS could be more efficient. It's got as much money as it asked for and things like that.
No, I think on mental illness, I think there's been a real increase in people's awareness that mental health isn't just some sort of fringe side issue, because it's so linked with physical health problems as well. And if you don't make sure people have got settled, balanced, happy minds, then their capacity to be productive at work, to have stable families, to do well at school, to be able to contribute is so much more diminished. Why are we not concentrating more right in those early days to get it right? I mean, it's not rocket science, this.
It's not. But doesn't it take more money, you would say, wouldn't you?
It does, and I'm a school governor, and in our school we've got a wellbeing project which is working really well, and it's looking at resilience and the ability of kids to sort of get through tough times. But it's almost an epidemic now of anxiety and stress and these kind of issues in school, and we need the resources to tackle it.
OK, schools are certainly on the list there.